one book really quick before we get into the top of our pile, what books that we're going to be reading next. I read Operation Sunshine #1. This is by Henry Zebrowski and Marcus Parks. Art by David Rubin. Colors by KJ Diaz. Letters by Ferran Delgado. This is Henry and Marcus from the last podcast on the left, so if you're familiar with their work, you kind of know what you're getting when you go into this series. But this is a book that's about vampires. Surprisingly, it's not about cryptids or about like the government Black Ops cover-up issues. Maybe that gets factored into this book a little bit. I won't spoil it completely, but this book just came out pretty recently. The story follows a 350-year-old, quote, bug, aka a vampire spawn, as she tries to live her life under the radar as much as possible in New York City. However, after a run-in with an OG vampire, as they call them, things begin to get a bit more troublesome for this young bug. And really, that's a gross simplification of this series. There's a couple of other characters that are involved, but I really don't want to spoil it because it just came out as of recording a week ago. So, you know, if you're listening to this now, maybe you've already read it, but still. David Rubin's on art in this book, and he's absolutely perfect. If you've seen his work before, you know that when he wants to get extra zany and wild with things, it kind of takes on this old school Ren and Stimpy style SpongeBob, when like SpongeBob gets dried out, or when Ren and Stimpy are doing something extremely gross and they just settle on a single frame of something that's far too detailed for a cartoon. Like, I feel like when this book gets very gross, Rubin really decides to just like go in on the details and make everything just look very disgusting, and it's awesome. It's so much fun. I will say there's a lot of blood and gore, but hey, we're dealing with vampires here. That was probably expected. But yeah, I really like this. And the thing that was probably the best part of this whole series is Rubin decided to not take on the stereotypical vampire look of this book. And I think if you've seen their art before, you know that they really are always going to lean into like the zanier, monstery, crazier stuff. And I really appreciated that the vampires, the old school vampires, are these just hideous freaks that when you think of the idea of something that wants to suck your blood, that's what Rubin put on paper, not like a guy with teeth who's wearing a cape. It's awesome. It's so much fun. But yeah, I will say Parks and Zebrowski, they worked together on a previous series called DC Horror Presents Soul Plumber. That was a very wordy book that was definitely them trying to just poke fun at the absurdity of a lot of different things all in one book, as well as religion. And it was fun, but it was very, very wordy. It reads like an early Stan Lee book, kind of, where they're just like nonstop captions, a lot of dialogue for no reason, just to try to like shove as many jokes on page as possible.
Some Bendis bubbles.
Yeah. Well, oh no, it's not as bad as Bendis. Just kidding. No, it's very much like that, where they clearly have a lot to say, and there's only so many pages that they can put it on, right? But with this book, they definitely either worked with an editor or just really honed in on what they were trying to do with this book. And I think that's because it's a much simpler concept of like, there are these vampire spawn and they need to somehow figure out how to deal with these old school vampires who have all come back to town. And yeah, it feels very much like another series that came out from Image called Bloodstained Teeth. This book was published by Dark Horse, I should say. Operation Sunshine is. But Bloodstained Teeth came out from Image a little while back, and it's about a old school vampire who has to hunt down all of the vampire spawns that he, for reasons that are insane and ridiculous, created all over the world, and they all turn into like pop stars and content creators on the internet, and the Vampire Council, who includes people like Bram Stoker and like basically every vampire media person you could think of are on this hit super council. They're like, hey, go hunt those people down and kill them, or we're going to kill you. And so the book is for him following, you know, all this stuff. It's very fun. But so it feels like that, but from the opposite perspective. We're following this vampire spawn as she's just like trying to survive, realizing that she made a really bad deal 350 years ago and just needs to get blood and just wants to smoke cigarettes. It's great. But yeah, the last question I have is, have you noticed, I don't know if you're at the shop super regularly or maybe you're on the internet and stuff, but I feel like there's an uptick in vampire books recently, or maybe that's just what's happening in my head.
I haven't noticed it recently. It's vampires are one of those things, like every decade or so they come back around. Yeah. Every 10, 20 years, like they spin back up on the cycle. You know, in 14 years, we're going to do a brand new zombie book. It'll be amazing. You know?
Walking Dead will still be reprinting its issues, you know? Oh, that's, I don't know. There is like a, I think we've had a bigger discussion on the one of the an older episode of IRCB where we talked about like there's this fluctuation. Someone wrote an article about this fluctuation between vampire stories and zombie stories, and it's all based around like where American politics are leaning. Like it's a weird trend. I don't know if it's correlation means causation or whatever, but somebody noticed a weird trend.